about to enter a world of darkness. A world where life and death are meaningless, and pain is God. Woo! Hey,
Alright everybody, welcome back to 31 for 31. What kind of horror do you personally find the most scary? I think for a lot of people it ends up being something like supernatural horror, movies like Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch, The Conjuring, those kinds of things. Another answer that I hear a lot is torture movies, like some of the original more grounded Saw movies or the Hostel movies. But for me, the scariest kind of horror is a classic home invasion movie. Slashers tend to focus on, campiness and creativity when it comes to the kills specifically. The kills they try to achieve on screen. They also have a tendency to, explore a larger variety of set pieces and, larger environments to kind of stage those kills in. There are exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, that kind of is where slasher movies tend to fall most of the time. Home invasion movies tend to happen on a little bit of a smaller scale. They usually have fewer characters, grittier kills that usually aren't played up for laughs or made, super extravagant with the gore, things like that. I mean, there usually will be a fair amount of blood looking at you, you're next. But, they're not played up in that campy kind of slashery, I hate to say funny, but like slapstick kind of way that a lot of slashers really tend to set up a lot of their kills. And they also take place in much smaller, more confined locations. Our movie for today's episode of 31 for 31 is the quintessential home invasion film. There's very few that compete with this one for the rights to be called the greatest home invasion horror of all time. But for me, The Strangers will always be the answer. Directed by Brian Bertino in his directorial debut, he had initially created the screenplay with the hope to sell it to a production studio for somebody else to direct. He didn't plan to direct it himself. When that didn't work out, he was approached by Universal subsidiary Rogue Pictures to direct it on his own. The movie was shot on a budget of around $9 million in 2006, but the movie wouldn't receive wide distribution until 2008, where it proved to be a sleeper hit after earning around $82 million worldwide with very little promotion beforehand. I think that they may have gone to some panels at conventions, ran a teaser trailer at a few different festivals, but for the most part, this movie did not have a huge promotion budget behind it before it came out. But enough about the background. I've not really delved into what the movie itself is all about. The movie has an incredible minimalistic setup, with the majority of the scenes taking place inside of a summer home where our characters have been staying after a wedding. Our two main characters are James and Kristen, and their relationship is kind of on the rocks after a failed marriage proposal from James. James calls his friend. Mike, who is the only other non-antagonist character to really show up in this movie other than the two leads, to come pick him up from the house so that they can get a little bit of separation. James and Kristen, after this rocky period in their relationship because of the declined marriage proposal. They receive some alarming knocks at the door and some unnerving behavior from a woman on their porch. And James decides that he is going to leave because I'm pretty sure in the movie Kristen needs like cigarettes or something. And he leaves. And after she is left at home alone, these strangers, aptly named, movie, by the way, the strangers break into their house and they kind of toy with them a little bit. Eventually James comes back, so now both him and Kristen are in the house together. They kind of toy with them a little bit. There's some, a little bit of cat and mouse kind of sequences that happen throughout the film. But eventually they are hunted and killed by these individuals. I'd really love to have like a more flashy plot write-up done for you for this one. But in truth, like that really is what happens in the movie. People go to a summer home in the middle of some rural neighborhood. Relationship is on the rocks. People break in. People kill the two main characters. That's it. Pack it up. Go home. That's all we had to talk about. There are some events that happen outside of that framework. Really not that many. Like at one point, Mike, who is the friend that James calls to pick him up, he finally shows up, but James mistakes him for one of the strangers breaking into the house, so he shoots him with a shotgun and kills him, like their one opportunity for help. That's really all that's really all I have, though, as far as, divergences from a very standard, paint by numbers home invasion formula. That's really one of the only things that I would really set this movie apart with, though, is that scene. The greatest compliment that I can give The Strangers, though, is how much the team behind it was really able to do with that plain foundation. Usually I would give a simple plot breakdown like that, and I would be like, where's the rest of my movie? I need more movie, please. This isn't enough. But they do as much as you possibly can with that foundation without getting into, crazy set pieces and things like that. They tell us almost nothing about the killers and why they're terrorizing this poor couple. They just show up, break in, and start punishing these two people who have done really nothing wrong up to this point. That is kind of where the true scares really lie within the context of The Strangers. In traditional slasher movies, the characters are usually unlikable, immoral, or just like outright terrible people. The characters in The Strangers aren't really bad or good. They're real. When the movie begins, it feels like you're eavesdropping on a mundane, everyday interaction between two completely regular people. And so to see those people be brutalized for basically just living their lives is somewhat shocking and irregular for a horror movie. The most famous line from the film's incredibly modest hour and 26-minute runtime is from the Dollface Killer. Whenever Kristen asks her why they chose to attack them, she just answers, "Because you were home." And that's like really heavy, disturbing stuff. It's like a truly random killing that happens in this movie. There's no like moral undertone of like, well, maybe we should root for the killer because, the killer's never a good guy in horror movies, but there's always that like, these characters suck, so I kind of want to see them get messed up in the worst way possible. Like everybody's kind of had that thought process when watching a horror movie, but there's none of that to be found in The Strangers, which makes it really scary. The killers, despite taking their masks off towards the end, never have their faces shown directly on camera. You get some hints of a side profile, There are some frontal shots, but they're usually obscured by shadows. And then you get some shots of the back of their unmasked heads, but their true identities are never really known to the audience. In fact, the only people who really get to see their faces are their victims just before they're about to be killed off. It's a great example of grim realism, which pairs well with the movie's based on a true story claim that it gives us before the film even starts. One of the things that I find really interesting about The Strangers is that it happens in a really normal rural town. Most horror either occurs in a suburban setting or a Wrong Turn-esque, like backwoods farmhouse type of setup. This movie's in like a 1970s ranch house in a fairly plain rural neighborhood. It's not exactly what I would consider to be a standard setup. With that in mind, also, just to mention, the whole 1970s farmhouse kind of deal, this movie takes a lot of inspiration from 1970s style horror. Even that, opening scene in this movie with the deep voice telling you that it's based on a true story, it's like textbook straight out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's pretty crazy, how much homage is paid to specifically 70s horror within this movie. With all that being said, The Strangers does have some glaring issues. Well, one massive glaring issue, and that would be the ending. The Strangers is a perfect example of many things. I've already said that, right? But unfortunately, one of those things is a great movie that just completely crashes and burns with the ending. And when I say the ending, I mean the very ending. At the end of the film, some Mormon kids who are doing some, door-to-door, passing out the pamphlets and leading people to, their religion type of deal. They show up at the house, they walk through the inside, and they discover the victims. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Sounds like a pretty disturbing end to a pretty disturbing movie. Well, it wouldn't be that bad if that was what happened at the end of the movie. I wouldn't be talking about this right now if that is what happened at the end of the movie. But as one of these kids stumbles upon the body of Kristen, he reaches over to, pull her eyelids shut, and she grabs his wrist and screams into the camera, thus leaving what was, up until this point, one of the most refreshing and realistic. It's really important to nail that home, is that this movie, up until this point, I would call this movie realistic. It takes a realistic take on horror off on a trope of an ending that undoes a lot of what made this movie great to begin with, and all for a gotcha moment at the end with a jump scare. Seriously, I can't express how much better this movie would have been if the Mormon boys walked inside, silently found the bodies, cut to black, cue the music, roll the credits, and send us home. That would have been chilling, especially after seeing the killers drive off in their truck beforehand. This movie could be vying for an 8.5 or even a 9 out of 10 if it had ended that way. But instead, it gets a more modest 7.5. That last scene isn't enough for me to truly dislike the movie, but it does disappoint me without failure every time that I watch it. It never, ever, ever gets less frustrating. And I think that's all I've got left for today. That's all that I had for The Strangers. I've been fortunate thus far that I haven't seen anything that I would consider to be a bad movie, or even just one that I didn't really like. If you're going to check this one out, maybe just pause after the Mormons enter the house, fast forward to the credits, and pretend the movie ended that way. You'll honestly probably have a better view of it that way than you would if you just let it roll and you see that stupid ending with the scream in the camera. Tomorrow, we're going to be checking out a classic of classics with 1931's Frankenstein, starring Boris Karloff as the monster. Until then, go ahead and give this one a like, a comment down below, and subscribe if you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much.